Okay, so it's the first mention that we hear in this first act of Goldberg and McCann, where this very subtle moment of change in terms of the body language precipitates, I think, a shift in that kind of vapid, empty ritual that we've seen through the dialogues between Petey and Meg. He says, "Oh, Meg, two men came up to me on the beach last night." Two men? Yes. They wanted to know if we could put them up for a couple of nights. Put them up here? Yes. How many men? Two. Again, Meg's dialogue continues in that kind of same vein that we've seen earlier on in the play, where she asks tautological questions that are the answers to which she's already heard. The first set, put them up here, are just really repetitions of what Petey said. And then the question that she asked about how many, obviously, shows that she's not really listened to the first thing that's been said to her. So we see again how faulty language is in terms of its communicative function. And Meg says, "What did you say?" "What did you say?" "Well, I said I didn't know. So they said they'd come round to find out." So I think, again, Petey's tolerance is very heavily evident in this, is that I think he's anticipating that Meg would need a lot of advance warning just to prepare the boarding house to fulfill the function that it is supposed to. He understands her character and her limitations. And Meg says, "Are they coming?" "Well, they said they would." "Had they heard about this, Petey?" "They must have done." "Yes, they must have done. They must have heard this was a very good boarding house." "It is. This house is on the list." "It is. I know it is." Now, I think really in this little section here, it's impossible for Petey to actually answer these questions. Are they coming? He's got absolutely no way of knowing this. Or if they'd heard about this particular boarding house. So I think what's important here, the lack of explanation for the logical connection of these men to this specific boarding house is part of the kind of surreal, detached element of this play that creates that sort of menacing fear. That the suggestion is open to the fact that maybe they have traced Stanley to this particular boarding house. Maybe they have networks of knowledge that means that they've traced Stanley and they've followed Petey and they know who he is. I think what makes this even more menacing is the insistence that the reason that they've heard of the boarding house is because it's very good. I mean, we can quite clearly see that it's not. So this makes this sort of plausible explanation that Meg carries out here all the more likely to be untrue. What she says in these lines is likely not true, and therefore there must be, by implication, a slightly more menacing rationale behind the logic that has led these two men, McCann and Goldberg, to this particular man on the beach and to his boarding house. And we see that fearful element, I think, when Meg just keeps repeating herself. They must have done, they must have, it is, it's on the list, it is, I know it is. And all those phrases there, it sort of efforts at self-reassurance. I think, again, offer us a way of connecting this moment with Blanche and her fears and the way that she kind of repeats herself and is insistent upon deluded visions of reality in order to allow herself to carry on. I think this is precisely what Meg is doing here. She's kind of reassuring herself that the reason for these men showing some interest is that the boarding house is good and that it's on the list, even though Stanley is their only guest and really has been their only guest for a long amount of time. So there is, again, I think within that, a suggestion, I think, of something more menacing being the likely reason for this. So I think one of the important things with this is this self-reassurance that they engage in here, I think, foreshadows kind of Stanley's attitude and approach to the entry of Goldberg and McCann. There's that kind of fearful, terrified incident where he questions Meg frantically after having put her through a similar kind of interrogation in a sense of fear himself. So this, I think, is another example of that proleptic irony where we have multiple iterations of this dramatic, fearful information being communicated to someone and them responding with a sense of profound fear and a desire for self-reassurance. Now, Petey shows this kind of tolerance and understanding again, which I think mirrors Stella's relationship with Blanche in the opening scene. You've got a room ready. I've got the room with the armchair all ready for visitors. You're sure? Yes, that'll be all right then, if they come today. Good. So I think that overall dynamic between the two of them, I think, borrows or is comparable to that understanding sense of tolerance that Stella shows initially towards Blanche in that opening scene. Now, she takes the socks and puts them back to the sideboard drawer, which I think is a sign of genuine purpose. This sock darning that she's been engaged in is just like all the other rituals that she's been engaged in so far in the play, and shows us that really that particular stage business is simply a ritualistic distraction from the alienation that underpins the relationship between these two characters. But here they have a moment of actual purpose. And this shifts Meg, I think, into an awareness of Stanley again, of purpose and of Stanley. So that maternal longing is not far away. I'm going to go wake that boy. And that language, that maternalistic language that she uses constantly, I think reveals something of a kind of a maternal relationship that in the end has an Oedipal kind of element. But I think also we see, to a certain extent, in the way Blanche talks about the people to whom she's sexually attracted eventually in the play, but in Act 1, the way she talks about her husband. You know, her husband that killed himself, she describes as a boy and a boy. There's a kind of strange mixture of maternal and sexual longing in both of these relationships that are both kind of taboo. They're sort of the violation of normal social conventions. And we see that very heavily in Meg's relationship with Stanley. Petey says there's a new show coming to the palace. He's talking about the theatre. On the pier, Meg obviously has no idea what he means by the palace and thinks it's somewhere that's on the kind of seaside pier. You know, it's a kind of seaside entertainment, which is clearly not what it is. No, the palace in the town. It's a theatre. And then Meg's misunderstanding is very heavily evident. And again, there's a sort of her obsession with Stanley is made very clear here. Stanley could have been in it if it was on the pier. So there's this mistaken kind of belief here in Stanley's artistic talents. And I think, again, that mirrors Blanche's own attitude to herself to a certain extent in that opening scene. I mean, this Stanley himself, I think, invites much more comparison with Blanche because he's the protagonist and has a shared sense of being, in some fashion, some kind of artist as such. Petey says this is a straight show. What he means is this is acting, this is drama, and there's not music in it. So Stanley couldn't be in this show. But again, we see through this Meg's obsession with Stanley. What do you mean? No singing or dancing. No dancing or singing. Again, she can't anticipate what this might be. What do they do then? What on earth could entertainment be if there's no dancing or singing? They just talk. Pause. And this is one of these wonderful moments of irony, I think, that Pinter's so unbelievably good at creating through such minimal verbiage. You know, there's barely anything going on in terms of language, but there is so much going on in terms of character revelation there that Meg is unable to anticipate and to envisage what might be entertaining about a show that consists of talking, because obviously the way that their dialogue unfolds is anything but entertaining, and the pause contains all of that subtext. There's this ironic exposure of her inability to imagine how talk could be some form of entertainment, because we've seen what she understands talk to be. And talk is nothing more than an effort to kind of shroud yourself, to evade understanding yourself and to evade self-awareness through kind of acts of language that are really there to convince yourself of a level of understanding and of intimacy and authenticity in the absence of all of those things. So there's no way in her mind that she would be able to envisage dialogue as something that could be artistic communication or entertainment. And her response is simply, oh, you like a song, eh, Meg? And this is, I think, again, a sense of understanding from Petey that Meg is incapable of imagining this, dramatic entertainment. So he shifts the topic of conversation onto something that she's much more familiar with. But you would presume, having been married for a long time, as we would be right in assuming, that he would know this about her already. And she says, I like listening to the piano. And we've got this dialogue that sounds like two people who have just met. They're unfamiliar with each other. I used to like watching Stanley play the piano. And again, the dialogue that Petey constructs here, or is attempting to construct with this line, is an attempt to move, I think, the topic of conversation away from Stanley. But he's never far away. And the dialogue, again, reverts to this obsession, this kind of maternal obsession that she has with Stan, to fill the void of her own alienation and her own lack of self-understanding and their distance from each other. Of course, he didn't sing, looking at the door. I'm going to call that boy. So the dialogue that, Petey tries to change the subject and shift the interaction in a different direction. And it fails. It fails miserably. Because within her first sentence, I like listening to the piano, Meg has provided herself with an association that triggers her recollection of Stanley. And then we end again with this maternal language. I'm going to call that boy. She's desperate to go and get him up because her life feels sort of empty without him. Excuse me. And Pete says, didn't you take him his cup of tea? So again, he sort of joins in here. He exposes the kind of ritual that he knows occurs every day in this boarding house, and it's from his side here, and I think he participates in this, I think probably out of a sense of futility, and trying to shift the dialogue away from this sort of maternal and Oedipal content. He wants it to be something different, but realises that ultimately it's a fruitless endeavour. So he plays now the part of a kind of father figure, I think, in this dialogue. I always take him up his cup of tea, but that was a long time ago. So again, that language reveals the ritual nature of these actions that are carried out to avoid authentic connections and authentic, spontaneous interaction. Did he drink it? I made him. I stood there till he did. There's a sort of overbearing quality about this, and I think it partly... there is a very gentle kind of example of foreshadowing of McCann and Goldberg and their overseeing of Stanley here. And I think the reason for that gives us some insight into Stanley's kind of aggressive outburst during the birthday party against Meg and against Lulu. It's this sense of being scrutinised and being watched and being regulated in some ways. Obviously something that he's, to a certain extent, wildly uncomfortable with. I'm going to call him. She goes to the door. Stanny! She listens. Stan! I'm coming up to fetch you if you don't come down. I'm coming up. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm coming to get you. Obviously, this language is the language of a parent with a small child. So it's kind of infantilizing Stanley. And that, I think, is, again, part of what motivates his outburst and his explosion of kind of subconscious rage in the degradation that follows the interrogation or the torturing, the mental torturing that Goldberg and McCann provided. It reveals why he has this sort of outburst against Meg and Lulu. There's a real overbearing maternal quality to the way that she interacts with him here, and it infantilizes him and turns him into a small child. I think in that particular moment, I think we could, have some comparison with the way that Blanche relates to Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar. We've got this obsessive fixation with him that I think is based on a maternal longing here, whereas there is the beginnings, an incipient form of an obsessive fixation, I think, with Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar that's mediated through those continual demonstrations of Blanche's fear. In a moment, shouts from Stanley, wild laughter from Meg. So this stage business, I think, reveals the alienation at the centre of their relationship. That Stanley shouts and Meg is engaged in wild laughter. So there's this sort of authentic pleasure going on and then an aggressive response from Stanley. So that alienation at the core of this relationship that we presume from the way the scene has unfolded is more authentic and more emotively engaged than the one between Meg and Petey. Again, shouts, laughter, those very blunt stage directions used by Pinter to create that sense of contrast. Petey sits at the table, silence. She returns. Petey, again, the stage business shows that he is used to not being part of this particular little arrangement between Meg and Stanley. He just goes about his business. Petey says, he's coming down. She's panting and arranges her hair, and I think there's a very deliberately kind of sexual connotation implied through this stage direction, that there's some sort of suggestion of Oedipal sexuality between the two of them, that I think creates an even greater sense of distance between Petey and him, between Petey and Meg, and then also between Petey and Stanley. I told him if he didn't hurry up, he'd get no breakfast, but still here in this kind of this hugely ironic fashion, Stanley is causing Meg to sort of pant and arrange her hair, and Petey's playing the role of a kind of sensible father. That did it, eh? Meg doesn't respond. I'll get his cornflakes. So, again, this, I think, deludes her into thinking that it's a shared interest that they have, sort of harassing Stanley in the morning, getting him up. I think Petey is allowing her to delude herself in that sort of maternal role, and I think again that offers parallels with Blanche and her evasion of reality that take the form of her own identity, but also her relationship with others. Meg exits into the kitchen. Petey reads the paper. Stanley enters. He's unshaven in his pyjama jacket and wears glasses. He sits at the table. Stanley's entry, obviously, characterises him in quite a dramatic way. He is slovenly, lazy. It's characterised by inertia. He doesn't shave. He's wearing glasses and sitting in his pyjama jacket. He doesn't even see fit to get fully dressed for people that, after all, are not his family. He has this total ease in the surroundings that I think contrasts really heavily with Blanche. We think of her first moment sitting in Kowalski's apartment on her own, where she's hunched up into a little ball. Stanley's completely at ease in her surroundings until the precipitating action of outsiders invading this safe space, whereas Blanche herself is the outside invader and shows an inability to adapt to those surroundings. So there's a real contrast in the way that these two playwrights handle their protagonist in the immediate context of the scenes that they occupy. He says, "Morning, Stanley." "Morning." Silence. Meg enters with a bowl of cornflakes, which she sets on the table. Again, there's a sort of ritual quality about this that I think, when I was first reading this, I started to feel like I was going mad when I got to this point. Are we about to undergo that same awful, stilted, meaningless breakfast routine that we've already seen with Petey? But of course, Petey's version of it, I think, is there to provide a kind of stark contrast to the way in which Stanley interacts with her during this particular moment. So Meg says, again, she registers this through questions that she knows the answers to. "So he's come down at last, has he? He's come down at last for his breakfast. But he doesn't deserve any, does he, Petey?" Again, in that moment in time, that dialogue, I think, is trying to construct a kind of a family dynamic between all three of them that I think only serves to highlight the alienation between them, because it's artificial and it's not authentic. And that, I think, really creates the sense of distance and alienation at the heart of their relationship. Did you sleep well? I think there's a kind of fakeness about this. There's a fakeness about her interrogations with Stanley. It's fraudulent. I didn't sleep at all. You didn't sleep at all? Did you hear that, Petey? Too tired to eat your breakfast, I suppose. Now, you eat up those cornflakes like a good boy. You know, she goes through the motions in these lines here of having some kind of adult concern for Stanley's well-being, but really she wants to fall back into this language of this maternal language and to admonish Stanley like a mother. You know, she wants to fall back into that particular role.